By the eve of the American Civil War, the United States was a nation experiencing massive change. Immigration was reshaping demographics. The abolitionist movement was evolving into both more radical and more widespread forms. And the economic and political divide between North and South was deepening. The question of slavery was no longer a distant moral debate, it was a central, explosive issue shaping every corner of American life. Let's get started. By the 1860s, nearly 5 million immigrants had settled in the United States, making up close to 15% of the nation's population. Most came from Ireland and Germany. Irish immigrants tended to arrive with few resources, settling in East Coast cities and joining the growing ranks of unskilled laborers in factories. German immigrants, often arriving with more money, tended to settle in the Midwest as farmers or small business owners. Despite these differences, both groups were largely Catholic, a sharp contrast to the overwhelmingly Protestant population that had dominated earlier U.S. history. This religious shift fueled a nativist backlash, a strongly anti Catholic movement aimed at limiting the political and cultural influence of new immigrants. The American Party, better known as the Know Nothing Party, emerged in the 1840s, seeking to prevent immigrants from becoming citizens or voting. In an atmosphere of fear and resentment, no Irish need apply signs shut Irish workers out of jobs. The Know Nothings even won elections in several states during the 1850s before declining by the American Civil War. By the mid 1830s, the abolitionist movement began to fracture. Some, frightened by anti abolitionist violence in both the North and South, argued for moderation. Others pushed for more radical solutions. William Lloyd Garrison by 1843 was calling for Northern disunion from the slaveholding South. Some abolitionists even supported violence. A group of prominent New England abolitionists funded John Brown in his militant campaigns in Kansas and then later in Virginia. Others turned to the power of literature and propaganda. The most influential example was Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in 1852. Stowe was not an abolitionist at the time. She had very little firsthand knowledge of slavery, but was outraged by the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Her novel sold over 300,000 copies in its first year, captivating readers and exposing many Northerners to the harsh realities of slavery for the very first time. Southerners, however, denounced her, one critic calling her a coarse, ugly, long tongued woman. Still, the novel's reach was unprecedented and helped push the slavery debate into mainstream Northern culture. While literature stirred minds, others took direct action. Nearly 100,000 enslaved people escaped to freedom before the Civil War, many via the Underground Railroad, a network of secret routes and safe houses. The most famous conductor, Harriet Tubman, personally led more than 70 enslaved people to freedom, earning the title the Moses of her people. Escapes, however, were dangerous, especially after the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which empowered slave catchers in both the North and South. The Northern economy was built on free labor, while the South was tied to slave labor, though Northern manufacturing still indirectly benefited from Southern slavery. Not all Northerners opposed slavery on moral grounds. Many feared that slavery's expansion would undermine free labor markets by forcing white workers to compete with slave based plantations. This led to the rise of the Free Soil movement, which aimed to stop the expansion of slavery into new territories so that white farmers could thrive. The Free Soil Party, formed before the 1848 election, embodied this vision, promoting a West for free men and free labor. Meanwhile, Southern leaders were sharpening their intellectual defense of slavery. In 1837, John C. Calhoun famously declared slavery to be a positive good. Southern defenders argued that slaves enjoyed better conditions than Northern industrial workers. Slavery fueled the Southern economy, which they claimed was essential to national prosperity. They also argued that Black Americans were biologically inferior and unfit for self care, a deeply racist justification. And lastly, they argued that slavery and states' rights to uphold it were protected by the Constitution. This defense hardened Southern attitudes and deepened the sectional divide, ensuring that slavery would remain the nation's most explosive political question. By the late 1850s, immigration tensions, an increasingly radical abolitionist movement, the rise of the Free Soil cause, and a full throated Southern defense of slavery had created a nation on edge. Each of these developments, from city streets filled with Irish laborers to secret routes of the Underground Railroad, from best selling novels to speeches in the Senate, was a piece of the growing conflict that would soon erupt into the American Civil War. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.